Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all settling in and comfortable for this evening's webinar, the first of our Club Support Hub webinars with Football Queensland. It's my job to officially welcome you all this evening and say g'day, and I hope that you're looking forward to a great session. We do have a few of these lined up between now and the end of the year as well. So my name's Michael Connelly. I'm from CPR Group, and joining me this evening also is Steve Connelly. Good evening, Steve.
G'day, Michael. G'day, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're pretty pumped about this webinar series, which kicks off a really exciting partnership with Football Queensland and us here at CPR Group. And Michael and I will be sharing the delivery of the webinars. So, yeah, really looking forward to seeing the numbers continue to grow in terms of registrations, and enjoyed the evening's proceedings. And I'll very happily hand back over to Michael.
Thanks, Steve. So I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging the traditional owners of all of the country where we walk, where we work and where we live. We recognise their continuing connection to land, to waters and to culture, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and of course emerging. Now this evening we have people representing pretty much the whole of the state. We've got people from way up north, all around Brisbane, the Gold Coast, from Logan Village Falcons, we've got Bundaberg, Ingham, Gold Coast again. So it's just great to see people from all over the state have signed in to the webinar this evening. So I promised you in the intro or in the promo videos for this session that it's not going to be a boring session about filling in paperwork or about meeting your compliance obligations the boring way. These sessions are really about trying to give you an opportunity to expand to expand your knowledge and to maybe sometimes even change the way that you think about your roles in community organisations. So the topic this evening is all about great club committees. So we'll keep coming back to that as we go through, because really what I want to do is make sure that there's enough in here. Some of it will be refreshers for you, but sometimes it's just a matter of having that little refresher to say, oh, that's right, I knew that we knew that stuff, but I haven't been applying it really well. So it's a chance to give you an opportunity to really think through the way that you think in a lot of cases. Now, at this point in time, I like to talk about the journey that everyone's on. For most of you, and I certainly know quite a few of you who are here with us this evening, this is not the beginning of your journey as a committee member on a football club. You're somewhere along the journey. The thing is that when you go on a journey, you've got to pack a suitcase. And our suitcase is what's up here. We've often just, though, absorbed information into our suitcase, popped into our little brain cavity up there. But it's not necessarily the right thing or the right way of doing things. Sometimes we pick things up almost by osmosis, or because we've been conditioned to think about things the way that the people who are in our roles before us have thought about things. So let me give you an example. And I'll open this chat window up. So if you can pop some answers in this in the chat box to this question as I ask, how many days before your AGM do you need to put the ad in the local newspaper? Have a go. Some of you will hopefully already know that answer. All right, so we've got 121, 21, 14, keep going, that's good. Okay, so we got between 2 weeks and 3 weeks so far. 4 weeks, there we go. 30, okay, so that's getting up to a bit over 4 weeks, a month. All right, that's good. But none of you stopped and asked the right question. The right question is, do we need to put an ad in the newspaper at all? And that's kind of a really good example to why we keep doing things the way we do them. Because we just think, it was a misleading question because you didn't think that I would ask you a question that the answer is, well, you don't have to do it at all. But what about your members who are asking you that? Or what about people who are on the committee who've just been doing that or thinking that somebody's putting an ad in the paper? Why would we need to advertise our AGM to the general public? They don't care about it. This is our organisation. So the answer is you don't need to. But that's a great example. So thank you for taking part. It's a great example of how you just kind of suck things into your brain without necessarily stopping and thinking, is this information right? And do we need this information at all? So as we go through these sessions, I'd also like you to consider that there are 3 types of what I call roadblock thinking. And these are things that you're not allowed to say when you're involved in a community organisation. They're all variations on a theme. The first one is, we do it like that because that's how we've always done it. The second one, and so you can see that's going to hold us back. You can't just keep doing things the way you've always done them just because. The second one is we tried that once, didn't work. And the third one, and I actually think this one could be the most damaging. The third one is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So what that implies is that when we get to a point, good is good enough. But it really isn't good enough because it's not necessarily as good as it could be. So the challenge that we're going to throw out through this webinar series is to help you to think about what could be. How could things be even better? So now I want to take you back in time to the point that you took over as a committee member. What was it like? Remember that handover that you got? If you were lucky, you got files that were well organized, well filed, and you could find the things that you were looking for. If you weren't lucky, you got a shoebox or a bag just full of things like receipts, and it's kind of up to you to figure out what goes where. But for the most part, some of you have even got nothing at all. So the last committee left disgruntled, maybe they were even kicked out, and you get nothing. So I want you to remember, if you've ever experienced that, if you've ever been through that, how frustrating it was, how awful it can be when you've just got nothing. And then you start bad-mouthing the old committee members who've been there before you and they've ruined things. Now just think about it. If you've been bad-mouthing them, it's a small club, word gets around. So people have already figured out that you don't like the old guard. They then don't like you. If you get to the point of, I don't know, maybe having to acquit a grant or similar, and you need just one receipt, and you know that the old treasurer knows where that receipt is, and you try and contact them, and they just say, you know what, you badmouthed us, we don't want you. So did you ever stop and think maybe the best thing to do when you took over was not to badmouth anyone, but just to say, hey, we recognize that being on a committee, running a club, takes a great deal of effort. So we just want to say thank you for that. Steve and I often say that we've never met somebody who got involved in a football club or any other community organisation for the purposes of ruining that organisation. That's not to say we haven't met people who have absolutely ruined community organisations and clubs, but they never get involved with that intent. It's usually the politics and all of the shenanigans that go on behind the scenes that make people become like that, or the fact that we forget that when we're running a volunteer organisation, there's no difference to running business. When we're running a volunteer organisation, there's no different to how we would manage our own finances at home. We just need to think just a tiny little bit more professionally about our role, and remembering firstly that we're dealing with people. So no matter how disgruntled you are with others in the club, with outgoing committee members, be nice, because it doesn't pay to ruffle feathers. Because what we seek to do is create what we call happy volunteers. A happy volunteer is somebody who gets to spend exactly the amount of time volunteering that they want to. And when they're spending that volunteer time, they're doing volunteer work that they love, that they find meaningful and valuable to their organisation. So that is a great place to start. Always think, how can I make, obviously, my job for myself enjoyable, but how can I make sure that this job is enjoyable for everyone else? Because if you, as committee members, create an environment and a culture on the committee that isn't supportive of happy volunteers, you're not going to get anyone to come and help you. So you need to make sure that that's exactly what you're doing. So I'll now introduce probably the most boring word in sport, governance. When we're in person, I like to get a show of hands. Please put your hand up, and you can do it figuratively or virtually if you like. Please put your hand up if you got involved in your organisation because you love governance. It's very rare. I do come across a few of these in service organisations and some university student associations. But people typically don't get involved in a football club because they want to be on a committee. They get involved in a football club because they love football. Our job as committee members is to make sure that the engine room that sits behind football is as strong as it can be. And that's where governance comes in. But I don't think governance in itself is really a topic. More so, I think that governance is kind of like the hub of a wheel, and each of the spokes on that wheel are topics of governance. So event management is a governance topic, finance management, asset management, volunteer management, risk management, compliance, fair trading reporting, Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation reporting, child protection. All of these are spokes in a wheel that creates the engine room of a fantastic club driven by a great committee. So let's have a look at how that fits then. If we start in an explanation of the anatomy of a club, and one of the handouts that you see is the anatomy of a club, you can think that the committee is like the brains of an organisation. So this is where the thinking happens. This is where the strategizing and the looking into the future happens. But these people who are up there in the committee need to have a whole heap of other people who are our operational volunteers. Now, what's important and what the greatest committees and therefore the greatest clubs understand really well is that I haven't put the brains at the top and the hands at the bottom because I think the brains are more important. Obviously not. They're both as important as each other. If we don't have great operational volunteers, our coaches, our managers, our game day coordinators, our field maintenance people, we can't have football. But likewise, if we don't have people who are focusing on all of those spokes in the wheels of governance, then the football can't happen either. So the most successful committees understand that it's not the fact that we've got governance at the top and operations down the bottom. It's the fact that there's a line in the middle, that there is separation between governance and operations. What you find is that our system of governance, the way that we run our clubs, is exactly the same as council or the state or federal governments. On the one hand, we have our elected representatives. That's you guys. That's our committee members. In council, that's our mayor and our councillors. In government, in the state government, that's the political party that wins the most votes, and then they form government and elect their leader, who becomes, in our state, the premier. And then you've got the people who are the doers. So from a club's perspective, these are the people running around on the field, or helping the people run around on the field. But from a council perspective, this is the CEO and the directors and the managers and the officers. And there's very clear separation between the people who set policy and make the rules and then the people who implement that policy. So very rarely will you see the mayor checking out a book in the local library, or will you see a councillor filling in a pothole on a local street? Unless, of course, it's election time, and then you can see anything you like. But it's the fact that there's clear separation between governance and operations, and that's what's really important. So you can, and what's important to understand though is that's not a destination. You never actually get there. It's always just something that we get better at as we go. So the purpose of this first session is to give you the foundation so that you understand that that's where we're heading, and then to start to fill in those gaps as well. Okay, so let's run our first poll of the evening. I would like you to have a crack at what you think the term not-for-profit really means. So there's a few answers here, and you can select. Actually, I'm only going to let you select one, because if you change your answer, it'll then change. So the first one is, don't know. The second one, we're not allowed to turn a profit. The third one, we're unable to share our profit with our members. Then the fourth one, we can only make a maximum of 150 grand in a year. Or the final one, we're only allowed to have a maximum of $1 million in the bank at any one time. So that's good. I can see some votes starting to come in. Now, this is one of those things that we typically just pick up by osmosis from those around us. And to be honest, I think it's a terrible name, because not-for-profit doesn't mean we're not allowed to make a profit. It doesn't mean that we have to spend the same amount of money as we make. And I can see that nobody has, I'll show the results here, nobody has selected the bottom two so far, which means that there's a limit to either how much we can make or a limit to how much money that we can have in the bank.
Yeah, yes, as Michael was saying, it's interesting how common the misconception is that not-for-profit means no profit. So I'm not sure if the results are still on your screen. Nevertheless, the majority of you indeed got that answer correct. There is only one answer to the question, what does not-for-profit actually mean? And that is that we are unable as a not-for-profit entity to share our profit with our members. So the members of a not-for-profit organisation are not shareholders. So if a for-profit organisation, such as a large mining company, makes a profit from one year to the next, all of the shareholders will share in a dividend based on the amount of profit that was posted for that financial year. In a not-for-profit entity, the members are not, as I say, shareholders, and they therefore cannot share individually in the profits that that organization has generated. Those profits must be reinvested into that organization's service delivery the following year or in future years. Michael, I'll hand back over to you, given that I can see you've returned.
Yes, sure thing. So yeah, those results are interesting, and I'm glad to see that most of you ended up getting that right. So that's very good. So the underlying principle here is that sport is business, and in Australia, sport is massive business. In fact, sport generates, before we put the value of our volunteer time into the mix, sport generates $13 billion annually to the Australian economy. So that's big bickies. Now, Steve and I often make a point of saying we're not going to stand up in front of you and say you have to run your club like a business. And it's funny when we do that, because very often we'll see people visibly relax. They go, oh, thank goodness. I got to say, why did you do that? Oh, Michael, you're so lovely. You just get us. You understand that we're just volunteers. And besides, we're not for profit, so we're not allowed to run like a business anyway. And I very politely say, well, that's a lovely misconception that you have there, but that's not why I'm not going to say you have to run your club like a business. I'm not going to say it because I think it's a silly thing to say. Your club is a business. Your club is a business. It's just a not-for-profit business. It's that simple. Every, and it's not only football clubs here, it's every community organisation is in business. Do you have to spend money? Do you deliver services? Are you trying to sell something? Are you trying to create a better life for people? Yes. Then sport is really easy, because in sport, it's user pays, and it's a great, cool product. So it's, we want to provide something, and people are happy to pay for that. And we'll talk about that a lot more when we're talking in a couple of sessions on money down the track. But it's really important for the community organisations to realise they are also in business. It's just sometimes the recipient of the service is different from the person who pays for it. Over here, you've got government that funds us to deliver a subsidised or even a free service. So who's our customer? Our customer is, for the money side, the people paying the bills. Our customer from a service delivery side, then, this is where it gets a little richer than a for-profit business, as Steve was talking about, is our recipient of the service is another type of customer, and they all have unique needs. But it's important that we understand that we make business-like decisions. We can, we should, and in my opinion, we must make good business-like decisions. Gone are the days when it's okay to say, oh, well, look, I'm very smart at work and I do a great job and run a good business, but then it's like I get to the club and I take off I'm a smart business person who knows how to make money and knows how to drive a good business and knows how to work hard, and I put on my dumb, I'm just a volunteer hat, and I'm going to complain about how council doesn't do anything for us, or how there's no point in that sort of complaining. It's about understanding that sport is business, and very big business. And the structure of our not-for-profits, this incorporation thing, sets a great foundation for us to launch from. So now the purpose of this picture of the blow-up toys in a swimming pool is because the first time, or one of the first times that I was delivering this session to, it was again a university student association, I said, tell me what you think this incorporation thing is. And nobody could really put their finger on it. So I said, okay, let me explain it to you the way it's written in the Act. In the Act, it says an incorporated association is a body corporate with perpetual succession. And a very smart student of medicine said, oh, body corporate, like those old fuddy-duddies who won't let us have blow-up toys in our swimming pool. And I said, not exactly. But the concept is right. It's a body corporate, which means it is a legal entity unto itself. So your club, as an incorporated association, and some of the bigger clubs have even incorporated in Commonwealth legislation as companies, not-for-profit companies limited by guarantee. But it's the same thing, just we report to a different entity. But the entity in itself can buy things, can sell things, can enter into contracts, can hold a bank account, can hold an insurance policy, and really importantly, can sue and can be sued. So that's really important, because that provides a great level of protection for management committee members, because it's the entity itself. So long as you're acting in good faith, in the best interests of members and within the law, then typically it's the protection of incorporation that keeps you safe, because it's the entity itself. The with perpetual succession bit means that your constitution has provisions in there that say, Once you guys leave, once this committee goes, there are provisions there to replace you. And that's typically by election at an annual general meeting. So it's a body corporate with perpetual succession. So to give you a little more in-depth look at that, we have our incorporated association, and typically an incorporated association is run by, well, always is run by a management committee. If it's a company, then if not-for-profit company, then it can be a board. So that is a subset of members that are elected to be the leaders of the organisation. Because an organisation, once it gets over, maybe a couple of handfuls of people, so into the double digits of people, there's probably too many people involved that they all need to be involved in making all of the decisions all of the time. So that's why the whole group then elects a smaller group to say, you know what, go and have the running of the club for 12 months, and then we'll see you at the next AGM. And we'll tell you how you've done then. Hopefully there's more interaction in the meantime. But what else is important about this slide is that you can see that the incorporation, or to be incorporated, we report to the Office of Fair Trading. That is separate from our affiliation to Football Queensland, and that's quite important. Because the Office of Fair Trading cares about us abiding by the rules that we need to be incorporated and to stay incorporated. To be honest though, Fair Trading don't much care about how good you are at football. That's Football Queensland's role. So then as far as the operations go, then that's much more Football Queensland's purview. So what that can mean then is that even if you weren't affiliated to Football Queensland, you could still be an incorporated club, a separately incorporated legal entity, body corporate with perpetual succession in your own right. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good idea though, because being incorporated provides great benefits. Income tax exemption for most sporting groups, provides the protection for management committee members. It provides other tax benefits like a higher threshold before we have mandatory registration for GST. But affiliation to Football Queensland or to our peak body, regardless of our sport, that's where we have the pathway. That's where we have the ability to participate in programs and services that are designed for us, and we can participate in them. So that, Steve and I have had these discussions with a number of organisations who said, well, we'll just go in and take them over. No, well, you can't, because they're separately incorporated. But because they are affiliated to you, then there can be separate rules for affiliation than there are for incorporation. And that makes perfect sense, because the two sides of the equation care about completely different things. So now let's jump into the Constitution. The Constitution is the rules. So I've just spoken about some great benefits that being incorporated provides, but to get those benefits, you need to follow some rules, and those rules are what's written in your Constitution. So I've got a question for you now. Let's just imagine that something goes wrong in your club. Can you as a committee member go to jail because of something that's gone wrong? Just in the chat, give me a yes or a no. Let's see what we've got. If something goes wrong in your community organisation, can you go to jail for it? All right, so starting to get some yeses. Okay, that's all right. Oh, Beck's nailed it. Beck has said it depends. So I didn't say that, but that's exactly right. We've got some people in the yes camp and people in the no camp, and a lot more people probably in the, well, it depends camp. And that's exactly what's the important part. And Karen's just made a very important point. Did you do it or somebody else on the committee? What is it that went wrong? And that's exactly the sorts of questions that you need to be asking, because that's exactly the sorts of question that would be considered if something like this ever was escalated to the courts. If the thing that went wrong was that all the money was stolen and you stole the money, then of course you can go to jail. But you're going to jail as a thief, not as a treasurer. Or let's say that you, at your big gala day at the end of the year, you're thinking about some rides to have, and you get a bucking bull, a mechanical bucking bull, but you don't worry about the safety and you don't check the certification of the mob that's running it, and somebody gets hurt. Now, in that case, the thing that went wrong was somebody was hurt, but there's a direct line to the committee making a stupid decision. So, yes, you can go to jail if you're a thief or if you're an idiot. So basically what we're talking about here is those three things that I mentioned before. if you are acting in good faith, in the best interests of members and within the law, then the answer is probably no. Probably, because it always depends on circumstances, but I'm happy to go out on a limb and at least say that. The answer is probably no, we can't go to jail. Can't go to jail, can't be sued, can't lose our house. The organisation itself can still get into trouble, but the buck typically will stop there. Now, this is an important point, and I just want to give you some background as to my theory as to why this is the case. There are at any given time at least 100,000 incorporated associations in Australia, and a lot of those are in Queensland. The number fluctuates because we're up to about 100,000 have been incorporated, but not all of them are still incorporated. So there might be a lot more than that, but let's just use 100,000 as the figure. Now, let's imagine that the Treasurer didn't steal the money and the Management Committee didn't have a bucking bull and nothing like that has happened, but just something has happened, and an individual Management Committee member, let's say the Secretary, to call out the secretaries in the crowd, the Secretary gets the book thrown at them and they go to jail, lose all of their assets, get sued, whatever it is, as an individual. What do you think would happen to 99,999 other secretaries? They disappear. When the secretaries are all gone, what do you then think would happen to 100,000 treasurers, 100,000 vice presidents, 100,000 presidents, 100,000 other committee members? They also would disappear, because then there would be precedent set for personal liability for something that was an organisational issue. So given that if that happened, everything that you do, all of the football that you run, councils would still want that to happen, because we have hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars per local government area, particularly in southeast Queensland, invested in our facilities, the land in our facilities. They don't want to see that stop. Government doesn't want to see it stop, because we all know the health benefits, including the mental health benefits of participation in sport, and football being the highest participation sport. You can then club sport, you can then imagine what would happen to the other sporting codes around the country as well. We don't want that to happen, because if that was to happen, council or government would have to pick up the tab. They'd have to start doing what you're doing. If they were to do that, they would have to charge us all a lot more money to run these things almost commercially, municipally or commercially. If they did that, they'd have to raise that money. That would jack up rates or jack up taxes. If rates go up, councillors get voted out. If taxes go up, politicians get voted out. They don't want to get voted out. So we want to protect our volunteers. So act in good faith, act in the interests of members, and act within the law. And then the system around us should protect us. Now, I'm going to run through just a handful of things, a handful of parts of your constitution that we think are very important. This does not absolve you of your committee member responsibility to actually read your constitution and understand it, but hopefully this will give you a better understanding of why certain things are in your constitution. So I'll start with the objects. These are why we exist. And you'll read it and you'll say, that's all about football, and that's exactly how it should be. Then we get to the powers. Powers basically define what I said about this legal entity. Anything that I can do as an individual in my own name, the club can do in its own name. And that's what's spelled out in powers. If your constitution is older, you will probably have a long list of powers, and it would be wise to update it to a modern version of the constitution. And Steve will be talking about constitutions in a bit more detail in our next session in 3 weeks' time. The clause in the constitution that is always the one that takes the most time to get right, probably because it's a really important one, is this one. It's the classes of membership. The classes of membership should define who is eligible to vote at general meetings and who is eligible to stand for election to the committee, who's eligible to be a leader in our club. But it can also spell out the other benefits of membership. So what do I receive if I am this class of membership, and any obligations? So obviously an obligation of membership is pay your fees, but there's also abide by the Constitution, abide by the codes of conduct, and abide by any other rules that form part of your being a good member of our club. If you failed to be a good member of our club, that then leads into the next point, which says that we can terminate your membership. We can't terminate a member, but we can terminate the member's membership. So we can kick them out of the club. So the Constitution has grounds under which you can remove somebody from membership, or reject their application for membership if that's the case as well. Further on, you'll have your financial year date. Now, this is important because your financial year date, it can be anywhere you like. It doesn't have to be the 30th of June. And in fact, most sports clubs have it so that an entire football season is within a financial year. So many of you will find that your financial year end date is probably the end of September. So that being the case, that means under the current associations incorporation legislation, you've got 6 months to have your AGM. So you've got to then, a lot of clubs find that they struggle to get their financials back from the auditor in September, October to have their AGM at a meaningful time of year before our members disappear off into summer sports. So if you wanted to, you could actually shift your financial year to earlier in the year so that you make sure that you've got your financials back so that you can have your AGM earlier. Because you've got 6 months, so the real question there can be, and without getting into the details of all of your individual situations, the real questions here can be, when do we want to have our AGM? Do we want an AGM at the end of the season, or do we want to let the continuing committee actually take us through that season transition period where we've got to do all of the negotiations with council, we've got to make sure that the facilities get their remediation works, and we've got to order all of our stock and uniforms for next year, and then have a new committee start in the new year, so before the season, or even really buck the system and have an AGM in the middle of the season. It is entirely up to you, but those are considerations that are available to you, and it only takes a constitutional change to be able to do that. Then you'll also have in your constitution committee details. We think that less is more. Keep it simple and don't necessarily define all of the positions that you might want on a committee. But a really important point about your committee, and indeed there's a little in the handouts, there's a structure worksheet in there that enables you to give some consideration to how you would structure your committee as well. We think that the ideal number for a committee is up to maybe 7. So it says in the worksheet that if you've got a small club, 3 or 4 is probably enough. You don't need too many cooks to be able to make a great broth. But once you get over 7, we recommend a maximum of 9. So once you're into double digits, what you'll find is that there's just too many people trying to have a say, and you become very ineffective. So you're far better off. And plus, once you get over 7, then you find yourself, the conversations that you're having at every meeting become less effective as well. So you don't need to define the number of people, so long as you meet the obligations of the Act that say you must have a minimum of 3, and the president and the treasurer can't be the same person. So those are the rules. From year to year, you then might fluctuate somewhere between 4 and 7, depending on your needs. And don't think that you must get people onto the committee, because remember that separation of governance and operations. Yes, we need lots of helpers. We need lots of people to help run football and run the club, but they don't all need to come to meetings. And in fact, some people who are the greatest volunteers in a club say, hey, I'll do anything you like, just don't ask me to come to a meeting. That's because meetings have a bad rap. So I'll come back to meetings, but the meetings, as far as the Constitution is concerned, they tell you the minimum number of meetings that you must have. So as far as management committee meetings, that's only once every 4 months. So you don't need to have heaps of them. Obviously, you couldn't run a club if you only met 3 times a year, but if you miss a meeting over Christmas, that's okay. And the only general meeting you must have is the AGM. And there's a whole heap of great information on that in the meeting guide in the handout as well. And finally, it talks about financial reporting. So financial reporting talks about, and we'll come back to this obviously when we're talking money, but it talks about the reporting that must be done on an annual basis. More practically, there's good reporting that you should be doing on a very regular basis, because as a hint to one of the questions we'll ask when we talk money, financial management is for everybody on the management committee. It's not just the treasurer. So, as I promised, let's talk about meetings. Now, this is typically one of the things that holds people back from getting involved, and it's because meetings go on for too long. So I want you to think about the longest meeting you've ever been to. How many hours was it? Look, just have a think, maybe pop it in the chat as well. I remember leaving a meeting that started at 6:30 at 11:30 p.m. That was too long. I found out later that the meeting didn't finish until 1:30. There were also about 30 people at that meeting. It was an AGM, and it was just far too long. There's a great comment. If a meeting is longer than a football match, it is way too long. Absolutely. 90 minutes, I reckon, for a management committee meeting, 90 minutes is way more than enough time. Because when you have a really good structure around meetings, and by that I mean great preparation and a great agenda, it means that the meeting itself is very smooth. So why do we even have meetings? A lot of people, when I ask that question, say, well, we've got to have discussions. We've got to deliberate. We've got to come up with ideas together. And while all of those things are important, I don't think that that's the job of a meeting. That's the job of all of your communication, all of the times that you're together, standing in front of the canteen, on the sideline, watching a match together. That's the time that you're always thinking and always having the conversations. The purpose of having a meeting then is to make the decision. Because when you make a decision at a meeting, that decision then leads to action. And when you're then leading to action, you're actually getting things done. And then the club can progress. So great committees have great meetings. They also understand, just to throw some maths around, they also understand that if we have, I'll show you my calculator, if we've got, say, 10 people on a committee and we have a 4-hour meeting, that's 40, can I say man hours? 40 person hours, 40 man hours of work. Now, Volunteering Australia values volunteer work at a sliding scale, depending on what you're doing. But let's use a round figure, right in the middle of their range of $40 an hour. Now, did that meeting of 10 people for 4 hours at $40 an hour each add $1,600 of value to your club? I bet it didn't. I can guarantee you that the Softball Association AGM that I went to detracted value from everybody's life. It was just a waste of time. We didn't need to have those discussions in a forum where 30 people were yawning. So absolutely, your meetings should be short and they should be sharp because they should be a chance to make the decision. And then the decision leads straight into action. So yes, we spend money to have our meetings. We might hire a venue. Hopefully you've got a clubhouse space to do that. But for the bigger meetings, you may need to hire a venue. So it's important that you are very conscious of the amount of time that you're investing in your meetings. But it's mostly the value of your time that is critical. Now, I mentioned before that being able to have really good meetings means being really well prepared. And that's not a typo. I don't mean preparing an agenda. I mean preparing and the agenda. Because preparing the agenda is only part of it. And it's not, for all of you secretaries, it's not the secretary's job to interpret what anyone means. So if somebody sends you something to go on the agenda and they say, can you stick barbecue on the agenda for me, please? You can say, well, that's a topic. What about the barbecue? And actually get details. And this is where the preparation comes into it, because it's not just the secretary's job to prepare, it's everybody's job to prepare. So if that person who wants to put barbecue on the agenda provides a very clear definition of why and what they want to achieve, and some quotes to buy a new barbecue if that's what they want to achieve, then they are prepared. And then everyone who sees that agenda can read through it. They can understand what's coming up. They can understand what's going to be asked of them. They are then well prepared. And guess what happens? We make great decisions. So again, in the handouts, you'll see that there's a template for both an agenda and for minutes. So we'll focus here on the agenda template. And there's a note on there to request, if you want a Word copy, because it's only the PDF there, if you want a Word copy, just contact us and we'll send you one as well. So to run through, meetings open, minutes of the previous meeting. You don't have to read them. If you're still reading minutes of the previous meeting, it's usually because somebody, sorry if this is you, but it's usually because somebody in the meeting didn't read them. They didn't do their preparation. And therefore they want to take everybody's time in reading through the minutes. Plus, if the minutes are done very quickly after the last meeting, that's the better time to check them. Then if there's any business arising from the minutes of the previous meeting, now's a chance to have a look at it. Correspondence in and out, a lot of groups don't even do that in management committee meetings anymore, because most of our correspondence is flicked in and out on email and a lot of stuff through social media, particularly Facebook. Then any business arising from correspondence. If you do correspondence, it's just the non-routine stuff that you really need to report on at a meeting. Then the Treasurer's report, and we'll talk a lot more about that when we get to the financial management sessions. Accounts for payment and accounts for ratification. So payment is approval. These are the ones that are coming up. We've got to pay our electricity bill because they'll cut the power off. Ratification says we paid this bill because if we didn't pay it, they'd cut our internet off. So now we're ratifying it, which means approving it after the fact. Then if we've got subcommittee and other reports, it says attach reports. Again, what that means is that if I want to submit a report, I should do that report as a quick written report, because then everyone can read it and they can think of questions to ask, rather than me just sitting there for half an hour saying, well, what happened this month? That's not a good use of your time, but it's also stealing everyone else's time as well. And again, not adding value, it's detracting value. Then the little point about admitting or rejecting any membership applicants. Now, this is there because it's in your constitution, and it's something that we can't take out because it's in the regulation. Every application for membership needs to be considered at a management committee meeting. And again, great committees do this, but they don't do it one at a time. If you're a club of 1,100 members, you don't need to go through and approve each one individually. It's only if there are any in there that you want to exclude that you can do that as one en masse motion, as it's written in there. Then we get to the important part, motions on notice. Now, in the little meeting guide, it does talk about how to compose a good motion, but that's less important than composing a motion to begin with. A motion is the decision that I want this meeting to make. So the bad example is the one that I just gave, barbecue. If Marion says, I want you to put barbecue on the agenda, this is how it typically works. Typically, we'll get, if we're lucky, we get barbecue on the agenda, or it usually comes up in general business. And that's a big trap. General business is business of a general nature. This should not be where you consider big ticket items. By no means should it be somewhere where we consider big ticket items. But your motion on a properly worded motion on notice would be something like that the club purchase a new barbecue up to the value of $700 from an appropriate supplier to replace the existing barbecue, which is broken. So when you see that come out on the agenda before the meeting, you know exactly what you have to prepare. And because you can see that Marion raised that question, you can go to Marion and say, hey, what's the problem with the barbecue? And then you and Marion can have a meaningful discussion. You can say, well, we have tried looking into it. It's not economical to fix it. The plate's rusted and the burners are rusted, so it's going to cost, and then it's easy to replace it. You go, great, that's fantastic. So you've done your prep because Marion did her prep. Then we get to the meeting and we can make the decision. So to role play, if we had barbecue on the agenda, and I want you to think about how this has happened to you, barbecue on the agenda. Now, Marion's been sitting very quietly for the whole meeting, and the chair turns to Marion and says, Marion, I see you've put barbecue on the agenda. Would you like to tell us what that's about? And Marion's been very quiet and very polite. She says, well, thank you, Madam Chair. Now, I think it was last Wednesday. Was it last Thursday? We were at the club and we were trying to cook. No, it must have been Thursday because Steve came and Steve was at work that day and he was well dressed and normally he comes down in his playing gear and he's not working. So yeah, so it must have been did I say Thursday? This goes on for half an hour. Typically it's half an hour. And what happens is everyone's kind of sitting like this and nodding off, and the poor chair then gets to the point of saying those famous words, can we pull it to a motion? So what that means is that we've just spent 30 minutes discussing something. So I don't actually know what we've been discussing yet, because it's only after 30 minutes of discussion that we get to the motion where it says, well, I think we need to buy a new barbecue. And then somebody rightly says, well, Marion, we can't buy a new barbecue because we haven't got any quotes yet. So then the action is go and get quotes. What a limp action. New quotes aren't going to cook my sausages, man. So what happens is Marion gets an action to go and get quotes for the barbecue. She comes back next month, or maybe we don't have a meeting next month because we meet on Wednesday nights and it just happened to be State of Origin night, so we didn't meet that night. Then we get back 2 months later, Marion, business arising from previous minutes. Did you get the quotes for the barbecue? Oh, I'm terribly sorry, I forgot. Oh my goodness. So this goes on for month after month after month after month until we get into the new year and we still are eating crunchy sausages or raw sausages. Yet, if we do it like this and we've got the quotes already attached. Yes, I want to move and buy a new barbecue because of somebody second the motion. Yes, I second it. And there's a process in the handouts for actually taking you through the moving and seconding and the voting of motions. Yes, I second it. Okay, anyone else want to talk to it? No, everyone's happy. Have we got the money? Yes, by the way, we actually got a grant to do that. Fantastic. Moved. Who's going to do what? The action here is Marion, go and buy the barbecue. That's meaningful. That gets my snags cooked. Going and getting quotes is something that should have happened in the lead up to the meeting. So this is the stuff that we do all the time at work. You don't turn up to a meeting at work unprepared, or I hope you don't turn up to meeting at work unprepared. You know the exact problem that you're trying to solve, and these are the sorts of things that we say when we're in work meetings. What's the problem we're trying to solve here? What are we going to do about it? Who's going to do it? When? Have we got the money? How much is it going to cost? Let's just do exactly the same thing here. So instead of having a discussion about something and then after half an hour saying, what's the motion, flip it on its head. Start with the motion. What's the decision that I want you all to make? And then I'm going to give you the reasons why I want you to make that decision. After the meeting then, the minutes get circulated. Now, ideally, as I said before, the minutes should be circulated very quickly after a meeting finishes. Now, the minutes don't need to be a complete verbatim transcript of everything that was said. What they need to say is, what was the question? That we buy a new barbecue. Were there any changes to it? So was the motion wording amended at all? And then who's got to do what? So those are the important things that need to be in the minutes. Now, of course, like everything, minute keeping can also now move into the cloud. So a great question that we like to ask is, how do you keep all of your club documents? If all of your club documents are hard copy in filing cabinets, then what happens when it floods? Remembering that most of our grounds are built on floodplains because we don't want to build houses or shopping centres there because they get flooded. So we build soccer fields there, and that's where we play. But it's also where our clubhouse is. So in 2011 and again in 2013 and again in 2017, do you know how many filing cabinets full of precious, irreplaceable documents just turned up as brown mush at the mouth of the Bremer or the mouth of the Brisbane River or the mouth of the Fitzroy River? This just happens all the time. This is Queensland. That's what we've got to be used to. So the other problem is that if we've just got it saved on my personal computer, then if my personal computer happened to be in the clubhouse when the floodwaters rose, it's dead as well. Oh, but I had it backed up on a hard drive. Where was the hard drive? Sitting in the drawer of the desk under the computer. So that's why we've moved into the cloud. Now, you don't need to spend a lot of money to get into the cloud, but it is certainly worthwhile from a not only a document protection perspective, and yes, if you spend money, you don't have to spend a lot. So there are great facilities available very cheaply. Google has a great one. Microsoft has a great one. Apple has a great one. Amazon has a great one. Box, Dropbox. These are all products that are readily available to us. And as not-for-profit organisations, we should be making the most. We should be capitalising on these. And I know that a lot of you already are. But I'd now take that to meetings as well. And certainly the software that we can recommend, because it's one that we developed, is it takes the templates that you can download from the handouts in this case, we're talking about a management committee meeting, and we'll talk about the AGM in a few weeks' time, but exactly the same there. You then, instead of doing that as a Word document, you open up a new meeting from a saved agenda template in Meeting Track that brings up all of the items that you would discuss every week anyway, and that is completely customizable by you. So if you don't want to do correspondence, just take it out of your template. If you do want to add a particular agenda item because, say, we have to talk about facility sharing obligations every meeting, boom, pop that motion in there, pop that agenda item in there every month as well. Then once that's set up, you just say who's turning up, put their names in because they're already in the system as members, and then it sends the agenda out to everyone. Then when everyone turns up, the agenda becomes the minutes because the agenda's gone, that's saved, that's great, that's saved. Then we just start entering the information. But because everything's already in there, all we need to do is say, what's the motion? All right, that we're going to purchase a new barbecue. Who moved it? Click. Who seconded it? Click. Was it carried or was it lost? Click. Save. Then we go add task. And that's where Marion, they're going buy the barbecue by this date, assigned to Marion. Boom, Marion gets an email straight away. A Word document won't do that, especially a Word document that's turned into minutes the day before the next meeting, so that the minutes actually get, they're literally hot off the press as you turn up to the next meeting. That's not conducive for great preparation. So tools like Meeting Track enable you to be able to do that super quickly and exceedingly affordably as well. So go and set it up. There's a web address there, and you go and have a trial, and you'll see that it will save you so much time. It will make it'll save you time in preparation for the meeting, but it'll also save you time in running the meeting. Because when you get to things like the Treasurer's report, for instance, or even the motions of the minutes of the previous meeting, when we get to the minutes of the previous meeting, the question is usually, does somebody want to move the minutes? Somebody goes, well, here are the minutes. There you go. I moved them. What are we actually doing? When we move the Treasurer's report, what are we actually doing? I moved that, the minutes be received be adopted as a true and correct record of the proceedings of that meeting. Boom, that wording's already there. The treasurer then moves a motion that my treasurer's report be adopted. Boom, the wording's already there. So for that standard wording, you don't need to think about it. So it also serves as a great education tool because it's very easy to slip back into old habits. And this will help keep you on track. So to finish off then, I'd like to introduce you to all of the handouts. So as I said, we've got the agenda and minute keeping templates for management committee meetings. We've separated out the AGM agenda and minutes because we're talking exclusively about AGMs and legal obligations and some constitutional work next time. We've also got in there a club anatomy diagram. So what this does is it reminds you that your club is an entity, and we talk about this legal entity in its own right. If it is an entity, then why not give it a personality? Why not give it a culture? Why not consider that, hey, this thing itself really should be a living, breathing entity that has a culture and attracts the right people to it as well. Then, as I mentioned, the committee structure overview, that talks about how big the committee can be and the sorts of positions on it. And there's a reminder there of the fact that the committee should be separating governance from operations nicely as well. There's a great guide in there for making informed decisions. Sometimes you can get paralyzed in not making a decision, not realizing that that's actually a decision in itself. It's a decision not to decide. Remembering that the purpose of a meeting is to make a decision, make the decision. You were elected as leaders of this club. You don't need to then go and refer every single question back to the full members. Because to be honest, most of them don't care. They just want to get out on the pitch and play football. So let's let them by being leaders. If there's a bigger question there, then of course that's something that you would put to a general meeting. And that's all in the meeting guide. But for the most part, the management committee, you are the leaders of your club. So lead. There's a very simple diagram about the committee meeting cycle as well. So what this reminds you is that there's only 6 steps there, but once the meeting is set, then it'll take you through preparing the agenda, actually running the meeting, assigning actions, and preparing for the next meeting, and then it starts again. So it basically takes you through a month, and sometimes a little bit more depending on the frequency of your meetings. As I mentioned, there's a diagram in there that shows you the process for how motions are moved and seconded and voted and then debated for and against. Maybe amendments are moved to the motion. So what that means is that if we're happy to buy a new barbecue, but maybe we don't want to say from an appropriate provider. We actually want to say, well, we know that Bunnings is on special, so we're going to go buy that one. We know the barbecue school has it, so we're going to go and buy that one. And I've already mentioned the templates there. So as I said at the start, the purpose of these sessions is to really give you a great foundation and an opportunity to challenge the way that you think about all of the history, about all of the way that you've learned things. Sometimes when we run these sorts of sessions in person, we ask a question, how well do you think you understand your club's legal obligations? Sometimes it's how well do you think you understand your club's financial obligations or your risk management obligations, child protection obligations, but it's always a trick question. This is a little secret for when we meet in person. When you're filling that in, just be careful because it says, I know a little bit, or I've got it's all right, or I don't know anything, but there's a trick in there. It says what I've learned from other committee members. And that's always the trap. Because if we've only learned everything that we know and everything that we do from other committee members, then the next time somebody asks you a question like, how many days before the AGM do you need to put the ad in the paper? You'll have a guess and you'll say, is it 14? Is it 21? Is it 28? Or is it 30? 35? I don't know. The right question is, well, just because Max said that we had to put an ad in the paper, let's go and check the source document. That source document, as far as this session is concerned, is the Constitution. It's the rules, so it's quite simple. Thank you very much for taking the time to join with us this evening. If you haven't already registered for our next session in 3 weeks' time on the 5th of July, you can register there at cprgroup.com.au/FQwebinars2021. And before we wrap up, I'll throw back to Steve to see if we've had any questions or any comments that we can answer before we wrap up.
Thank you, Michael. No, there have been no further questions come in. Thank you very much again to everyone for joining us. There's been a couple of questions early on about the recording of the session. The session has been recorded and will be shared subsequently. So any of your counterparts on your club or zone committee that haven't been able to make it along, you can share the session with them after tonight. And as Michael mentioned, really looking forward to the second session on AGMs and legal requirements of organisations in 3 weeks' time. So look forward to seeing you all online again then.
Fantastic. We'll leave the session running for a few minutes if you want to keep the chat going or keep anything else going on in there. But otherwise, we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks' time. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.